Good evening. I'm going to call this Planning Commission meeting to order. It is Thursday, May 18th, 2017, and it is now 6:31. So I'll start with a roll call this evening, and we'll start on my left.
Roshino Farrell.
Nancy Anderson.
Larry Crandall.
Shanna Collins.
Brooks.
Matthew Petrich.
And tonight, Jane Garrison is absent. I think everybody else is here. I want to make one announcement. Commissioner O'Farrell said you'll miss June 1st meeting, right? So we'll put that on the list. And then also I will be absent on June 15th. So Mr. Vice Chair, get ready. Okay. Any other absences coming up and that anybody knows of? Okay, great. Now that we have a full commission, we don't have to worry so much about making quorum. Okay, so next is the approval of the agenda. Has everyone had a chance to look at the agenda? Mm-hmm. Any changes? Okay.
I move that the agenda be accepted as distributed.
I second that motion.
Excellent. Everyone in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say no. Okay, and that passes 5-0. So next topic is the approval of the minutes. And I wanted to make a small adjustment to I should have done this just now, but it's actually the meeting minutes from April 6th, not April 2nd. Right. That's okay. I just noticed that when I was looking at it today. So are there any changes? I do have changes from Jane Garrison for the April 20th meeting, but I don't have anything for the April 6th meeting. Does anybody have any changes?
No.
Okay, let me just make sure. Let's see. Okay, Commissioner Garrison would like it to say, where did I put that? Okay, in the meeting minutes for April 20th, Commissioner Garrison would like it stated in the discussion section where it says commission and staff began, she wants it to say that she stated that scaling buffers to the property size rather than a width based on purpose could appear to be a taking. So I think we'll add that, and I know, Kevin, you have that, so you have that on email. Okay, so with that, I entertain a motion to approve both sets of minutes.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. And that carries 5-0. So both meeting minutes are approved. Now is the time in the evening for public comment. This is the time for non-agenda items. So if anyone in the public would like to speak on a non-agenda item, and tonight the only agenda item really is the Title 24 update. So if you have something to talk about besides that, come on up. Is there anyone who'd like to speak this evening? No? We're just gonna.
I'm not sure exactly if
Come on up.
if the only thing is, you guys may remember me from last year when we were here about the property group on 244th trying to do a rezone. So I don't know if I'm able to talk on that now or not.
You should probably speak during the agenda item. So what we'll,
That's what I have it.
yeah, okay. Because what we'll do is we'll have a work session, and then you'll actually have more time to speak if you wait.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so with that, I'll close the non-agenda public comment period, and we will move on to old business. And tonight, the only item on our agenda is the Title 24 update. But it looks like Ms. Hildy would like to speak.
Yes.
Or is this on this?
It is. It's on Title
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hildy.
Great. Well, good evening, Planning Commission. Tonight, we have David Goodman, our management analyst, and Doug McIntyre, senior planner, and they will be presenting a draft update of Title 24A. As you may recall from the April 20th Planning Commission meeting, staff presented the policies and procedures required to update our city's comprehensive plan. More specifically, the discussion focused on deficiencies of the code and an approach that would be needed to draft a new version, which is what we'll be discussing. As a reminder, on June 1st, we will have a public hearing for Title 24A, and that's also the time that the Planning Commission will finalize a recommendation to City Council. So that's just a reminder. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to David and Doug.
Thank you, Kelly. Good evening, Commission. Before I get started on Title 24/24A, I just want to provide a brief update. On Tuesday of this week, the Council passed the sign code amendments that we worked on with you for a couple of months. So they had a really good debate, and in the end, they approved of a lot of the work that the Council did, or excuse me, the Commission did on the sign code throughout our meetings. So just want to thank you all for all of your work on that and encourage you to look into what they eventually passed to see what changed and what stayed the same. And if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer at the end of the meeting here. So my agenda items for this presentation. First, I'm going to, again, give a brief review of the context of why we're doing this at this particular moment in time. I'm also just going to make a brief note about comprehensive plan amendment proposals that I hope provides a bit more context into the real purpose of the comp plan amendment process, and hopefully will give a good frame for what we're going to talk about afterwards. And then I will introduce some of the new and exciting features of the draft code which we provided you, which is SMC Title 24A, which will replace SMC Title 24. So a quick review as to why we're working on this now. The current title that deals with updating the comprehensive plan, Title 24, has not been updated in almost 15 years. And since then, the city has adopted 2 comprehensive plans, so it's time for an update anyway. But adding to that are many changes in the RCW, in the state law that deals with comprehensive plans, as well as the city. So there's lots of things in the code that simply are no longer accurate because times have changed both at the state and city levels. And as a result of that, Title 24, as it currently stands, is a bit disorganized. It has pieces of the process that are in different chapters. It has references to things that are no longer accurate. And it's generally just a bit unclear as to what the process and purpose of this activity is. So those are some of the reasons why we're bringing this to you today. And those are some of the things that we hope the draft that we provided you are going to clarify. So a note about, before we get too far into it, a note about comprehensive plan amendment proposals. So I interned at another planning department, and they had a term for a certain type of development. They referred to it as of right development. And what they use that term to mean is that for certain things, like as we have here, subdivisions or conditional use permits or things like that, there's a set list of criteria, and if you, the applicant, can show that you meet those criteria, the city has to lawfully allow you to do whatever it is, whatever the activity is that you propose to do. So in other words, as long as you show that you meet a certain list of criteria, you're allowed to do something. And that goes here with many land use actions that I'm sure you're all familiar with, subdividing and et cetera, et cetera. Comprehensive plan amendments are different in that they are not, to use the term, an as of right activity. They're completely discretionary. So there are no set criteria that you can meet by which by meeting them means that the council or the commission has to let you do something. It's completely up to the commission and the council whether they want to allow something or not. There's nothing guaranteed about submitting an application for a comprehensive plan amendment. And the reason this is because the comprehensive plan is supposed to really serve as the touchstone document for the city over the period of time which it's active. So in this case, it's 8 years. A lot of work goes into those plans when they do the 8-year review. And the reason that is because it's supposed to be kind of solid for the entire 8 years, and lots of other decisions that the city makes are based on what is in that comprehensive plan. So the point is not really to be able to change it a lot during that period of time. That's not to say there aren't occasions where it should be changed. All I'm saying is that it's not something that is necessarily guaranteed. It's not something that is meant to be tinkered with a lot. So just want you to keep that in mind as we go through the process here, and to just remember that this process provides a lot of discretion for the commission and or the council to make decisions. There's not a set list of things that need to happen in order for something to definitely happen, if that makes sense. So the goals for our new title, 24A, as I mentioned in our last meeting, is to streamline the amendment process, both in practice and as written. Currently, as written, it's rather confusing and disjointed. To provide a predictable and flexible schedule for the periodic update, which is the large update that happens every 8 years, and a biennial review, which is what we're proposing here. We want to allow for more advanced planning for consideration of proposals. So rather than do this year by year and have staff time staff time that's going to be spent on this be contingent on what applications come in the door, we want to provide a little more flexibility for the city to provide an adequate amount of staff time and resources to these things. We want to eliminate the wordiness that is a hallmark of the current code. And we also want to remove the sections that are no longer relevant to this activity. So some of the, what I'll call key features of our new title here, we are going to propose going to a biennial review process, by which every 2 years, the city will accept applications for comprehensive plan amendments instead of every 1 year. Although, as I mentioned, because this is a discretionary process, the city doesn't actually have to do anything every year. It's just allowed to do it up to once a year. So we're proposing doing it on a 2-year process. It's going to be a two-part review. The first part of this biennial review will be the docket review. So every application that comes through the door will get an initial analysis by the staff and an initial run-through by the commission and the council to see if they want to dedicate the following 2 years to looking into the matter further. And that would be our legislative review, which is a fuller analysis to determine whether the proposal is worth approving or not. So what we hope that this framework will do will provide some guidance to staff, the commission, and the council in terms of what criteria to look at in determining whether a proposal is worthy of approval or not, while also reflecting that the council and the commission have a lot of discretion on whether or not to approve and to move forward a proposal towards adoption. We also want to rely a little more heavily on what our deputy director calls dynamic references rather than copying text. So that means rather than copy and pasting a lot of words from the RCW, we're just going to cite the RCW, and that way, if the RCW changes, which it has since this was adopted in 2003, we don't then have to go back and redo this every time. We can just the reference will continue to be valid even if the content of what it is referencing changes. So a little more about why we're proposing a biennial review. We think it has a couple of benefits. The first is that we would be able to coordinate the review with the budget cycle. So our proposal has the biennial review following the 2-year budget cycle that the city currently operates on. We feel like this will provide the city with a little more flexibility in ensuring that there are enough staff resources and time to fully analyze whatever proposals make it to the legislative review phase. We also feel like doing it in this manner might allow proposals to be considered alongside related work plan items. So in the case that the city has been planning to work on a particular issue anyway, if there's a comprehensive plan proposal that is related to it, we could do that in conjunction with one another. And it also emphasizes the importance of the periodic updates. So as I was saying, a lot of work goes into the 8-year updates. Those are usually at least 2-year-long processes. And again, we want to emphasize that that's the time when we really are supposed to be breaking open the comp plan and looking at all sorts of designations and policies and things. And those items are supposed to really stay static for the period of the 8 years. Again, it doesn't mean wouldn't be occasion to change it within the 8 years, but we really want to emphasize those periodic updates as being the time when we're going to look at some of these things. So a bit more about the 2-part review process. As I mentioned, the first part is what we're calling the docket review. There would be a July 1st application deadline for proposals. That would be the year prior to the biennial review. So in the case that the biennial review is 2019-2020, the application deadline would be July 1st of 2018. Following the application deadline, we'd have a period of time for staff review. And this would be when staff would just do a general analysis, nothing too serious, but enough to provide the commission and the council with enough information so that they can make an educated choice on whether it should move on to legislative review. And then, as we did last year, that would come to the Planning Commission for review. The Planning Commission would make a recommendation to the council, and then the council would adopt a resolution setting the legislative review list for the following 2-year review period. We are not making it too prescriptive as to what sort of criteria the commission and the council would look for when determining whether to add an item to the legislative review list. But we did provide a little bit of guidance in saying that the availability of staff time and other necessary resources should be taken into account when that decision is made. And following the docket review, if a proposal is approved to go on legislative review, we would likely request additional information from applicants, a little more in depth as to why they're proposing what they're proposing, and some of the effects that they think it might have. Excuse me, it might have. One other important issue here is that it's largely up to the applicant to justify their proposal and provide the commission and the council with the reasons why they believe it should be adopted. Following that, we would go through a similar process of staff review, followed by planning commission review and recommendation, and then ultimately council review and an adopting ordinance. We do have, what we did is adapt 3 of the criteria that are currently in the code for land use map amendments, that we would ask the applicant to answer these questions, and then the council and commission can consider them. These are the anticipated impacts of the proposed change, whether the proposed change implements and supports the goals of the comprehensive plan, and ensuring that the proposed change is compatible with and will not affect the health, safety, and welfare of adjacent and nearby existing and permitted land use and the surrounding development pattern. In terms of text amendments, which are the other type of amendment that you can make in this process, we didn't provide any criteria for that because depending on whether it's a policy change or just a background information change, it varies so much that we didn't think it was a good idea to have one set of criteria for all of those, and we trust that staff, the commission, and the council would be able to make a decision based on whatever the context is of the particular amendment. And again, at the bottom there, also just want to emphasize that although these 3 points are our suggested criteria for looking at these proposals, the council may approve, deny, or modify proposals based on criteria other than those listed. So that's one of those ways that we want to reflect the discretion that the commission and council have. So that's the extent of what I think are the highlights and the main differences between what we're proposing and what already exists. We will have a public hearing here with the commission 2 Thursdays from today. And then, as Kelly mentioned, at that meeting, we plan on receiving a recommendation from the council, and we'll forward that on to, or excuse me, the commission, and then forward that on to the council, where there's a planned study session on the 13th, another public hearing on the 27th, and then it's currently scheduled to be adopted on consent on July 11th. So that's all I have. Doug and I are happy to answer any questions you might have about any of that or anything else that's in our draft.
Thank you both. All right, we can start with questions.
Well, first of all, talk about things that are not permanent. I happened to see this in the paper today, and it reminded me, and everyone can think back maybe where they were May 18th, 1980. That's when Mount St. Helen changed its look. So and then there's another new term that I found in the paper, impermanence, which means things don't stay the same. And I like what you're presenting here, because I picked up and wrote the words down: clarity, relevance, review, flexibility, and streamlining. And I hope those all fit many of the things that the city is trying to do. I know council is really concerned about trying to make things relevant and flexible. And the only suggestion I had in this, because I really like the way the document's prepared, and I know there'll be some tweaking, well, two things. First of all, you allude to the correct usage of biennial, but biennial has two meanings to it. So when you say 2 years and then biennial, we're not assuming every 6 months. Okay, and that brings me to my, hopefully my final statement, and that is, for the benefit of staff, the council, commission, and the public, maybe there could be an attachment showing what these 2-year cycles are, because a lot of us get busy in many things, and oh yeah, I got to get, that's 2021, I better get that done in 2019, you know, get my paperwork in, or staff wants to catch up and change something, they need to know that too. So that would be the only suggestion I have. I'm sure there'd be some comments from the rest of the commission. So thank you.
I actually have a lot of questions. I hashed up my copy of the draft, so I can sort of go through this piece by piece. Okay, so first of all, I appreciate that this is a newer, cleaner version. I did find it somewhat disjointed, however, and had to go back and reread things. I feel like some of these provisions are potentially out of order. So they refer to each other, but the reference is later in the document. So I can give you examples as I go through this. But I want to start with the first, I guess it's 24A.10.020, the first paragraph 1. The City of Sammamish Comprehensive Plan shall be amended no more than once a year, except as amended, blah, blah, blah. If we are intending to establish a 2-year cycle, I think that ought not be there at all. Then, so there's the reference then to the RCW. If this is an electronic version, is that going to be a dynamic link so that a person could click on that and it would take them to the RCW, or is that, is someone going to have to go Google that?
We could make it a hyperlink.
Links would be fantastic. Okay, so that's first paragraph out of the way for me. second paragraph.
Wait, can we stop there
Oh, yeah.
really quick? Sorry, because Commissioner Garrison also had the same comment about the amended no more than once a year. And I'm wondering, is that necessary that we say that because it's part of the code? I agree with Commissioner Petritz that it is confusing. Does it have to be there?
And thank you for pointing that out. The nature of the work we do is that we start out with our first draft, and that doesn't always capture everything, and you guys have identified something that we just overlooked.
Okay.
This will be an iterative process. David and I talked about this earlier today, that he caught it this morning. So
Okay.
there have been 3 catches of it, which is great, and this is why we do this, to get better code. So.
Excellent. Perfect. That's all I wanted to ask. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to slog through this. The second paragraph, the comprehensive plan may be amended between periodic updates, and it's the first time I'm seeing that phrase in this document. So that isn't defined, and so it seems like we are talking about the biennial review comes in I think in paragraph 1, and then the periodic update comes in paragraph 2, but the reference is confusing. I don't know what a periodic update is by reading this, and I have to go then to the definition section later on. And I don't know if that's solvable in a clean way, but I'd like to see that clarified, I guess. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, if it's sufficient that it's down later and people can look that up, that's fine. I had to go back and loop around. And then later in that sentence, it be amended between periodic updates to, I think there's 3 things going on here. Address technical updates and corrections, number 1. And number 2 is to consider docketed changes which do not require substantive changes to policy language. And then I'm not sure whether this is a third item or a continuation of that, or changes initiated by the city. And if either it's missing punctuation, and there's in fact 3 items there, or that one long sentence of saying that and to consider docketed changes which do not require substantive changes to policy language or changes initiated by the city, doesn't actually make a lot of sense to me.
I think it's probably 3 things there.
So you're referring to, at the top of page 2, letter J there?
Actually, no, it's my first page,
Oh, I'm
the
sorry.
second paragraph under general procedures.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
And maybe it's just missing a comma, or I'm misreading it. I don't know. It lacks clarity.
Yeah, that's an item that I think is missing a comma after policy language, because the intent there is that the comprehensive plan may be amended between periodic updates, referring to the amendments we're discussing now. And it outlines situations in which that would occur.
Okay.
Errors, updates, et cetera.
Okay, so the changes initiated by the city is separate from the requirement that there are no substantive changes to policy language.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Can I make one clarifying point? And I apologize that I did this. I was misunderstanding the comment that was made earlier. The first comment that Commissioner Petritz made in regard to the once a year, that is actually part of the Growth Management Act, and that establishes a floor, essentially. You cannot ceiling floor. It establishes a cap in the sense that you cannot amend the comprehensive plan more frequently than once per year. And so that is actually a correct reference. So I just wanted to clarify that. I apologize. That was a misunderstanding on my part. I wanted to get on the record.
Okay, then the other question I have on this first page is the list of the last sentence says, the comprehensive plan may be amended in the biennial review only to consider the following, and then it goes through all the way through from A through J. Where is that part of the original text, or where did that list come from?
Yes, that's part of the current code, Title 24.
Okay.
Should a zone reclassification be put in that list? Or is that considered the site-specific amendment?
So a zone reclassification is a separate process that's actually an administrative process. So the long story short is that if you were to change the zoning on your property on the future land use map, which is the map that's contained in the comprehensive plan, that would only apply on the future land use map, and in order to actually implement that zoning in the current land use map, you would actually have to do a zone reclassification, which is a separate process that does not go through the same rigor as the comprehensive plan. Does that make sense?
Actually, I want you to explain that really slowly.
Try
Because
with
I
that
have a
now.
feeling that a lot of people are here tonight because of the zone reclasses. So one of my initial questions was, I don't know how to, maybe I should ask this later, but I'll ask it now and then you can decide. I wanted to hear an example of a site-specific land use amendment that is not a zone reclassification. Just because most of the ones we saw on the docket last year were all zone reclassifications, besides those, a few text amendments. So go ahead.
So to add on to what David just said, essentially our comprehensive plan has a future land use map, and that is sometimes referred to as the comprehensive plan map. Many times we just call it the land use map. So there are two types of maps. There is the land use map, which establishes more of a higher level intent on the city to place certain uses in certain areas. So many times a city's land use map will say low density residential uses go here, office, commercial uses go here, industrial goes here, et cetera, et cetera. And that establishes kind of the broadest framework for land use. And then that is further implemented by the zoning map, which is what we use to connect the land use map to the development regulations. So that's considered the implementing piece of this. So there's consistency there, but it is more specific and it relates to directly to parcels and proposals on those parcels. So that's the clarification that when you do propose a comprehensive plan amendment, you're amending the land use map, which needs to then be consistent with the zoning map. So in many cases, those are, you might have a low density residential designation and then also say an R1 zoning classification, that those are related, but again, the zoning map further implements that. The situation that we're in currently is that our Sammamish land use map is more specific than say a typical land use map where it actually specifies R1, R4, R6. So it goes a step further, and it is in that case closer to a zoning map. So we have that creates a situation in which to get the rezone, you need to then amend whatever that zoning classification is, because we do have multiple types of zoning designations for low density residential. For instance, we have R1, R4, R6, R8, et cetera. And so while you may have you may be in a low density residential area, you may want R4 instead of R1 or some other change. So every rezone that we deal with has to first amend the comprehensive plan through the land use map. Hopefully that makes sense.
And just a point of clarification, the phrase zone reclassification refers to a specific process that is only relevant to the current land use map, whereas for the comprehensive plan map, as Doug just described, we call that a future land use map amendment.
Okay.
So while you might refer to what happens on the comp plan map as a zone reclassification, what that phrase actually refers to is a specific process that only happens on the current zoning map.
Correct.
So there's code and a separate process for a zone reclassification.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So what generally would have to happen if you were to submit, let's say you submitted a proposal to change the land use designation on the future land use map, on the comp plan map, to change your zoning designation, and you got that approved. So now on the future land use map, instead of your property being R1, now it's R4. That's all well and good, but that still hasn't changed the current land use map. So not until you change the current land use map, and that process is called the zone reclassification, would you actually be able to implement that density on your property.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That's really important, I think. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry for that.
No. The rest of these, I think, are going to be pretty simple. On page 3 of my document, so it's the 24A.30.010 and the amendment procedures general, paragraph 1, subparagraph A. I think there's a missing period at the end of the sentence. It reads, citizens may submit applications for site-specific land use map amendments. There's no punctuation, then it starts with applicants may only submit.
Yep.
So there's missing period, I believe. Easy. And then I guess I'm confused at the, so it's that same paragraph 1, subparagraph A, subparagraph I, when it goes on about citizen-initiated site-specific land use map amendment proposals, and then it lists 2 requirements. So they're eligible for consideration during the biennial review only if the proposal, number 1, corrects a technical error, number 2, does not require a substantive change to comprehensive plan policy language. Is there supposed to be an and or an or? Is that, do the amendment proposals have to meet both requirements or simply one or the other?
One or the other.
Okay, I guess I'd like to see an or in there, so that is clear. Let me see here, notes that don't pertain. Oh, so then under the amendment procedure for the biennial review, which is 24A.30.030 on page 5 of my document, paragraph 1, timing, subparagraph B, it says the biennial review may not occur during years when a periodic update is scheduled. And I'm curious whether may not is a must not or a could not.
Yes, I actually, I've circled that as well. The intention there is to say that it could but does not necessarily have to, and the city could reserve the right to not do that when it's time for a full review, but it's sort of read the other, I can see why it's easy to read the other direction, so we can rewrite that so it's a little clearer.
Thank you.
To add a little bit of a context to that, so what I have experienced in the past is when a jurisdiction goes through the periodic update, there's a lot of resources dedicated to doing that update, and when you are, as David mentioned in his presentation, you open the whole thing up, and that is an opportunity to really do the heavy lifting, and so we wouldn't necessarily want to also have an annual or biennial amendment process going at the same time. It would be not an efficient use of resources, so a lot of times those are actually wrapped into the periodic update, and I've done it a few times where we actually elicit those specific concerns from the community, and then you treat them as if they were of the biennial amendment nature, and then they get kind of wrapped into the legislative process for the periodic update. So it's a way to use resources efficiently.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense. I just, that could be read 2 ways. Okay, then
Just one more comment on that. So during the periodic update, citizens could they still submit applications to make changes?
Yeah, and it typically it's a less formal process, and from my experience, the fees are usually waived in that case.
Okay.
There are fees associated with coming forward with a comprehensive plan amendment application, and if it lines up with the periodic update, many times, I'm not saying that will happen, but many times it is waived, and it's used as a tool to garner public input on specific properties, and it's done in more of an open house kind of format where you solicit the input that way, and then move forward with the whole update.
Okay. So it's not like you wouldn't, I just don't want to make sure that we wouldn't skip, so it wouldn't be like 4 years before citizens could make a change. Okay.
And that's a good point to clarify that it would not. It would be subsumed under the periodic update process.
And then in the spirit of eliminating excess verbiage, in subparagraph 1, subparagraph A, that talks about the application deadline of July 1st, and then the next subparagraph 2 is basically a reiteration of the deadline. I don't mind reading it twice, but I don't know if we need that in there twice.
Fair point.
And, and this could be just me being persnickety. The next page, legislative review procedures, the general guidelines. We have subparagraphs 1, 2, 3, 4, and then under subparagraph 4, there is an indented paragraph 1, but there's no 2.
That's the only subparagraph there, so that's why.
Okay. Does it need to be a subparagraph? I'm just, it
Sure.
just looks awkward.
Open to discussion, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay.
I mean, I would say it relates to the subparagraph 4 right above it, but it's a separate point, so that was my thinking there. But if you feel like it is confusing, we can.
Oh, I don't know that it's confusing. I wanted more, right? I thought there'd be 2.
Sure.
Okay, so then my only other concern on this page is in subparagraph 5, it goes on and it's the last sentence, says that this time limit may be waived by the Director of Community Development or the Council if the proponent establishes that there exists either a blah, blah, blah. And it's the first time that word proponent has been used. Am I correct in assuming that proponent and applicant are the same person?
Yes, that should read applicant instead of proponent.
And, the end of that sentence also encouraged me to make some notes on my paper, so that applicant is establishing that there exists either an obvious technical error or a change in circumstances. Am I correct in assuming that there is some established procedure for figuring out what obvious means or when circumstances have changed? Or is that just a part of the application process?
That would probably be just at the discretion of the director, I think.
Okay. Okay, and I guess really you addressed this when you made your presentation, when you laid out the 3 criteria that the City Council shall use, and then there's that sort of blanket statement in subparagraph 2 of the review criteria, where it says basically they can use any criteria. So I understand the need to provide flexibility and to allow the City Council to have discretion, but it makes me wonder why you would enumerate some and then say, and anything else they see fit. Why have any?
That's a good question. Partially the reason is to provide the applicants with some sort of framework to provide justification for their proposal, so that they have some idea of the types of questions that the council might ask, and some consideration of what the council might be thinking about when determining whether to approve a proposal or not. It's essentially trying to strike a balance between having some sort of structure, but also reflecting the fact that, again, this is an entirely discretionary process. So that's sort of my thinking. I think that not providing any criteria might. I feel like providing the criteria we do have provides a little bit of a boost both to the applicant and to the people on the commission and the council who will be reviewing the proposal, while not going too far and making it seem like, well, I answered all these really well, but I still got denied, so what's the deal?
Yeah, well, I guess that's what I'm concerned about. I mean, I would imagine there must be language somewhere that says that the council can't be capricious, and there has to be some rational reason for a decision they're making. Or at least I hope there is.
Yeah, so
okay.
to add to what David has said about this process being discretionary, this actually comes down from the Growth Management Act, the GMA, where the GMA provides deference to local jurisdictions to implement their comprehensive plan as needed and as fit for the community. And this is one perfect example of how that happens, where David also touched on this in the presentation, that this is not a by right kind of application. This is a totally different beast. And if you meet all of the criteria and you are still denied, that is something that the council can choose to do. There is broad authority given by the Growth Management Act to local jurisdictions to implement their comprehensive plans, and this is one example of that.
So is there like an appeals process if that decision comes down and it wasn't one of the three criteria used and it was something else? Does the applicant have an opportunity to go back and amend their application?
It would have to come through the next cycle.
2 years later?
Actually, I think it's 3 years, right?
Oh, yeah, it would be.
We're still
Isn't
looking into
there-
that provision, the language in that provision, but
Okay.
I think we'll come back next time with some more clarity on that, about the process for after.
Okay. I guess I'm just concerned that, to me, if I'm an applicant, this doesn't provide me with much in the way of clarity. I don't know necessarily why I may be approved or denied.
That's something that so that's a good example of a case where rather than load up the code with a bunch of language, that's something that we would plan to make clear throughout the application process with people. So, we'd like to put things like that on our application forms and in our publicity materials announcing that this is available for people, but we were hesitant to put that, to codify that, just because it makes it that much more difficult to change it if we need to change it, and it kind of locks us into a certain way of thinking about things that might change over time. Again, your point is very well taken. This was sort of, again, our attempt at balancing the lack of, really the lack of official criteria that there actually is for this type of thing, while providing applicants and decision makers with some sort of basis for thinking about these proposals.
Okay. And the key here is that comprehensive plan amendments are they become very political, and they're rooted in something that is just a completely different way of thinking than, say, a subdivision application or, say, a building permit or et cetera, the hundreds of different types of permits there are. This is a very different beast. It's entirely discretionary.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment on that.
And I'll also just add, if you think that there are other criteria that might be helpful to have in this process, where these criteria are things that the city wrote up. There's nothing in the state code that says it has to be these three things. So if you have other ideas or suggestions, we're more than welcome to consider those.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it from me.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, speaking of the criteria, I was a little bit worried about using the word welfare because I think it's so subjective. I don't know. But that kind of gets back to what we're talking about, is that it is completely discretionary anyway.
And the term that we use, and this is used throughout the country, is we do everything in the name of public health, safety, and welfare, and that is actually
It's like a term.
right. It is, and it has been legally defended over hundreds of years for why governments have regulations at all, and it's always to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public.
The citizens. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Eric?
Yeah, I have a few questions, comments. I like this streamlined nature, so good work there. I like the methods of referring to other legislation, the RCW. I think that'll help. I do have some comments some questions that are similar to the ones asked before. We're talking about a biennial review. And I'm wondering if, so in 24A 10.020.2, the last portion of the comprehensive plan may be amended between the biennial review period. I guess that's what I'm maybe having some of the same. It seems like we have some exceptions. We have this review that happens every other year, right? And then we have some exceptions for times that fall between those two bookends, and I guess it's not quite as clear that that's the intent, and so maybe tweaking the words to maybe just me, I don't know. But.
And thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point. That the point David made in his presentation about the dynamic references, those are captured in the subsection 1 under that 24A.10.020. The reference to RCW 3670A130 does explicitly explain the situations under which cities can amend comprehensive plans, and that relates to, generally speaking, emergencies, to bring the comprehensive plan into compliance with the Growth Management Act, to adopt sub-area plans, a few other minor things, but they are specifically accepted from this process to allow cities to continue to keep their comprehensive plans consistent with the Growth Management Act and keep everything moving. So those are the few narrow exceptions.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering if, in that kind of same vein of these exceptions, if part of the reason that we're limiting the exceptions is because it's a strain on staff and resources, right? And I was wondering if there's any instances where an applicant could just fund or pay for the, I know, and there's some cases where you can actually help offset that. You can get an outside consultant and pay them to do the review for you. I don't know if there's any instances where that might be an option. It might be something that you could offer someone, just pay for it and have it done and get it done quicker.
It's in the community's best interest to have the planning staff that is intimately aware of and involved in the regulations and the day-to-day activities of the city to then review those amendment requests and then shepherd that along through the process. Having an outside help for the city's sake wouldn't necessarily gain the city anything because, for one, because of what I just said, but also because the end result is still that it needs to go through Planning Commission and City Council for adoption. So ultimately, I think it serves the community's best interest to have the in-house planning staff conduct that.
So it's part of that kind of different animal aspect, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Exactly.
Under the process, there's a couple of subsections that are just are specifically about the process. It kind of speaks to Larry's comment earlier. It might be interesting to give some general timeline about, like, okay, so this process is this many steps, and that you should expect that's going to take 9 months, just to kind of help people plan their calendar, maybe. I don't know if that's even possible, but you might have some general idea. I know you can't say it's going to be exactly this much because there's all kinds of organic nature to it, but over the course of time, this generally takes this much time.
And that's something that internally we've talked about in terms of handouts in our webpage. So we know that we need to do a better job of the outreach side of it. So I think those are perfect items to address and clarify outside of the code. When we first looked at this, and actually when we look at all of these code amendments, signed code included, we try our best to streamline and reduce wordiness and reduce things that relate more to an administrative piece. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the whole package. This is a major part of that package, but it's not the complete package. So I think that those are items that we have internally talked about developing as a way to help the public understand the process.
Well, that's great, because that leads perfectly into my next kind of observation. I was looking at the Mill Creek processes, and they have some kind of bite-sized pieces that kind of tell the story a little bit and get people prepared. And I was wondering if we could have some more of that, but what you're saying is almost this kind of how-to guide that goes along with this thing that, and that's exactly what I was thinking, some supporting education materials that kind of helps people really feel comfortable with what's going on. Maybe an example of what a similar project, so they see some stepping stones. I think that would be helpful.
Exactly, and I think that's one of our next steps with the sign code is developing some of these handout materials, public materials, that I think maybe we can share that with the Planning Commission if that would help in terms of maybe not as specifically related to this, but just what the department does that you may not see on a biweekly basis when we come to you with code amendments. I think that could help give you guys the full picture.
Right. I think oftentimes on the construction building side, I use the tip sheets more than the code, because they kind of get you there. So I think that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm almost thinking a flow chart would be really helpful with dates and deadlines.
So to continue on the vein started about the organization, I understand you're taking out the current Title 24 altogether, is that right?
That is correct.
When I looked at it and I looked at other elements of the Sammamish Municipal Code that we've worked with, there's a certain cadence, there's a certain order of things that take place. And under the current Title 24, it goes from a chapter on general provisions to definitions, Sammamish comp plan, basin plans, and then the procedures. So you're eliminating all those first chapters and just having a chapter 24A on procedures, is that correct?
So not quite. So what we're doing, we will have, so there's 3 chapters in here, in the draft that we provided. Chapter 24A10 is purpose and general procedures. 24A20 is definitions, and then 24A30 is amendment procedures. So we're going essentially from 5 chapters to 3. But, you know, some of these chapters here in the current code, so for example, the basin plans chapter is no longer relevant. The general provisions chapter doesn't really say anything all that useful. And the definitions we're keeping, and then we felt like the current 2415, which is just called Sammamish Comprehensive Plan, and current 2425, which is procedures for amendment of comprehensive plan, had a lot of overlap, and some things were split across the 2 chapters, so we felt like it was unnecessarily confusing. And you know, I think we're pretty confident that we were able to get the entire scope of the thing down to our 3 chapters, and down to actually just the 1 chapter to talk about process.
To chime in on that is that so based on my experience outside of the city of Sammamish, the way that current Title 24 is written is very unusual. In most cities, those provisions that David mentioned actually don't even exist, and they focus simply on the procedures. And I've thought a lot about that, and we've talked internally about that, and we think that the reason why that is in there now is because it was adopted in order for the city to give itself guidelines to adopt its first comprehensive plan. So we think that that had something to do with it, and it is currently called the interim comprehensive plan. And so that in my mind, again, I wasn't here at that time, but I think that the intent behind the way it is structured today was to allow the city a path forward to adopt its first comprehensive plan.
Right, thank you. I guess with the general procedures starting, I'm with Commissioner Petrix in the sense that there's some definitions that should probably precede that section. So I know you said the general provisions doesn't really say much, but it is kind of a preamble. A general provision is that then launches you into definitions, and then you can get into the meat of the title. It's just a suggestion, and it may help clarify some things instead of having to flip forward and wonder, where are those definitions? Whereas in other titles, in other chapters, it's set up such that you start with your definitions.
Thank you. I think that's a good catch, and I think that we should restructure it that way. Purpose, chapter 10 definitions would probably then be chapter 15. I think is to be consistent with the rest of the code. Definitions are almost always the chapter 15. So
exactly. Thank you. There's a section of the current code or current title that's interesting. It's 2415.050. And it directly relates to neighborhood character, referring to matching the character and density of neighboring properties. And I hate to see that go. We've talked about character. I know you're now referring that. It sounds like that particular wording is going to show up in the paperwork for the applicant. Is that correct?
Just looking to find the passage that you're
2415.050.
And which subsection?
under Sammamish Comp Plan.
Yes.
I wonder if we could make that part of the criteria.
Sorry, so is it section, so we're at 24-15-050, so is there can you tell us the paragraph number?
I don't have it in front of me. It just said,
Okay.
it talks about neighborhood character, and it says to match the character and density of neighboring properties. Under rezone?
Oh, here.
Is it under?
Subsection 3A.
Yes, so this, in the current code, this refers specifically to something called an area-wide rezone, which is a city-initiated process of rezoning a large swath of properties. So this wouldn't, even in the current code, this wouldn't necessarily apply to site-specific land use map amendments, which is what individual citizens can submit. But as I said earlier, if that's something that you'd like to be one of the criteria, or one of the unofficial, I'll say, non-binding criteria for looking at these procedures, we can certainly put that in our next draft.
I would support that. We should do that.
Great, thank you. And let's see, what else was I going to ask you about? On your slide that talks about docket review, can you go back to that? So when we looked at what we went through this last year, there were 3 kind of type of amendments that were presented last year to us. The types were like land use and zoning, technical amendment, and then there was the housing element amendment. Can you step through each of those categories and say what would change from what we went through last year?
So I'll just start out to say the housing element is actually a special case. That was a case in which the city is actually allowed to amend the comprehensive plan outside of this normal, what we're now calling biennial review, because that was an order from the Growth Management Hearings Board. So that one actually is a bit of a separate case. As for the other 2, and Doug can, if that's not clear, Doug knows a little more about that than I do. In the case of the other 2, it would essentially be the same process as we went through last year, although probably extended a little bit in time just to give us a little more of a chance to do a better review. And the only difference really is that there would be a little more discretion, a little more flexibility in terms of what types of things that the code says that the commission and the council can consider. But essentially, it's the same process. Just instead of every year, it would be over a period of 2 years.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Anderson, if you recall from the discussions we had on the docket at the end of last year, I believe it was October or November timeframe, the conversation revolved significantly around resources available to do the review. And this would allow us to better align with the budget cycle so that we can put resources into the budget to allow us to undertake some of these larger items. And that was really kind of, this change is being proposed based on the experience we had last year. So this hopefully makes sense, and if you can recall that conversation.
Right, and your workload then, when did you start on last year's amendments in reviewing them yourself?
The deadline for the 2017 docket, which was what we talked about at the end of last year, the deadline was September 30th to get that in. And then the city sets the docket at the end of the year and then does the analysis in 2017.
It was a pretty quick turnaround. So we received all the applications by September 30th, and I think by the middle of November, the end of November, so only about a month and a half later, that we were setting the docket essentially.
Well, and again, it is discretionary to look at these amendments, but to be fair and equitable in our community, you're going to want to review each of them that comes in. As our city has grown, we're probably going to have quite a few. Oh, and the process outlined here will give it fair and equitable time without arbitrarily just saying we're too busy, we can't deal with this.
That is precisely the point. And from my experience, what typically happens is it's actually more related to the economic conditions. So in a really, say, bad economy, such as 2007 through 10, you actually see a lot of comp plan amendments. And then in a really good economy, you also see a lot of comprehensive plan amendments. It's the in-between that you don't really see a lot. So that's just color commentary from my experience, that it's a lot of times driven by the market.
Thank you.
So, speaking of commentary and kind of using building code as a reference that I have, I also find that the code commentary is often a really super helpful tool. And oftentimes it states why the code is the way it's, what's the driving force. And we've a number of times have questioned why is this code that we're changing, why does it exist as it currently exists, and maybe there's some good reason for it. So maybe a code commentary kind of component of your work would serve in the future to tell us why we did what we're doing now, right? And it might actually be useful kind of for the future.
Notes to ourselves.
Okay, so I suspect that a lot of the public is here tonight to talk about the changes and how they will be able to, how they will actually be able to participate in this process. So I wanted to do ask you guys to go through sort of an exercise, almost like a flow chart, and kind of show us how this process coincides with the budget. I guess I started a small flow chart, and it would be, for instance, the pre-application process would have to be, like a few months before the July 1 deadline? So we're talking May?
Generally speaking, yeah, that's probably a good idea. The pre-application is really to help the applicants come forward with a complete and thorough application, and allows the staff to conduct the review. That is a crucial point in terms of completeness. We can deny applications that are not complete, so they will not even come through the door if they do not have all of the elements required for a complete application.
So everyone would have the opportunity to have a pre-application meeting if they wanted it and if they scheduled it.
Yes, and once we solidify this, in the past, for example, last year we opened it up. We made an announcement about mid-August for the September 30th deadline. It was a bit of a scramble to get some people a pre-application conference, if you apply 5 days before the deadline, for example. So I think next time we're going to open it up much earlier for people. That way they have time to ask questions, and we have time to schedule a pre-application conference a couple weeks out if we have to.
Okay.
I have a quick question about that, actually, because I could foresee an issue where an applicant comes in, has a pre-application meeting, they think they have a complete application, they've dealt with all the issues, and then the city council, comes up with something different. Is there a process during that initial meeting when it's made clear to the applicant that there's no guarantee that when they're completing their application according to the staff recommendations, that doesn't guarantee anything about the way that it's going to be reviewed or looked at or decided on by city council? I mean, I would just hate someone to think, golly, I did everything, and they came up with this whole new issue.
We try to make that very clear to people, and in fact, when saying that to people, we actually, some people came in for a pre-application conference. We informed them of that, and they decided that they weren't going to apply. So we were very clear at the outset of what the nature of this process is.
To add on, maybe, and possibly more technically speaking, when we deal with, say, subdivision applications or building permit applications or shoreline variances, et cetera, the term completeness, that is actually a formal step in the process, and that determines the vesting date. And so that's, a project can vest to the codes in place at the time of a complete application. And the difference here is that we're talking about a procedural element in the way the city conducts business. And there are no vesting privileges for procedural items. So that is not something that you can vest to. And that is the case for all procedural elements.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so then July 1, 2019 would be the deadline to submit an application. And then after that is where I sort of start to lose sight of how long things will take. So from about how long does it take from the application process to the docket review? And it's like, what elements need to be completed by the time you get to your budget? Is it the docket review that needs to be finished before you get to budget so that you can plan for the resources for the actual legislative review? Is that how it works?
I think we'll need to go back and kind of develop a pretty clear flow chart for the next presentation. I think that would be pretty useful for both sides and the public as well. So.
I'm not sure we'll be ready to have a public hearing if we don't really have that.
So when we say the docket coincides with the budget, essentially what we're talking about is that at the time that we have all of our applications in and then we're reviewing them, the budget is being developed at that same time. So it just gives us a better idea of whether or not there's going to be time and resources to review these things. And then the scheduled review, again, part of the reason we're doing this, we are proposing this to do over 2 years, it just provides us some more flexibility in terms of scheduling. It doesn't, in the case that it would be 1 year, there's a opportunity, there's a chance that everything could have to be rushed at the end of the year, or else people would have to reapply again. So we don't want to be too prescriptive about when these things will take place, just because it hamstrings us a little bit, and it might give some, unrealistic ideas to the applicants. Generally, I would say the staff will probably take the remainder of the year prior to the 2-year review period to do their analysis, to talk with our director and the city manager about resources and calendars and things like that, and then also to put the review dates for the commission and the council on the calendar. This goes through 2 rounds of review in both bodies. These things take a lot of time, so we're just trying to be realistic and providing ourselves enough flexibility to do this the right way rather than rushing it.
So I guess what would be the end goal for the legislative review? You would want that to be finished by, I guess that would be 2021? So that you start getting more applications all of a sudden? So you want to finish the legislative review before you start getting new applications the next July 1?
It could be the case. Again, I think we just really we don't want to set anything in stone, because that ends up getting us into trouble more often than not. Whereas the way this is written, we could do it that way. We could finish it earlier. It's less prescriptive for us, and it allows us allows us the ability to do it in a way that we feel provides everybody the same high quality review, and also gives the commission and the council enough time to take their time and review these things, because these are big changes to a document that has a lot of effects on a lot of the city's operations.
To add on to that, a lot of times comprehensive plan amendments will trigger greater policy discussion, and those are not really baked into staff resources, staff time, because we don't know what may come up. It's entirely possible that some proposal could result in, say, a new policy of some nature, and the city would want to have enough resources available to give it a thorough review and outline a path forward. So that's really the intent there, is that there's some level of the unknown that we deal with, because these are such a different type of application that we deal with. They can be wide-ranging in nature, and they could be very narrow in nature. It really depends. And as I mentioned earlier, it also depends on external forces, timing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really hard process to budget for, to anticipate. And so this is our attempt to really try to link everything up appropriately and give the right amount of effort for the applications that we get.
But is it possible, because we're going through a 2-year review of something and somebody puts something in on the 1st of July or thereabouts, is it possible to give somebody kind of like, even if it's a very extended way into the future, but some kind of a drop-dead date, you should know by this date what's decided, even if it is like 2 years from today, but that they would have a notion of when there would be a completion date?
And
Even if it's like extended into the future to give, because I take your point where you don't want to kind of hamstring yourself in case unforeseen events pop up, but so that the applicant's not kind of sitting there at home twiddling their thumbs going, I've no idea when I'm going to hear from the city, so that they would have some notion, or even check-in times and say, check back with us here and I'll tell you where the application's going, and I might be able to give you an update on when we'll have an answer, something like that.
Yeah, and I think Chair Collins had made the point that you would want to complete this and have everything adopted prior to opening up the next application. That is something that we would definitely do. And that would force us then it would probably be the first, quarter 1, quarter 2 of the second year that would happen. So sometime in that frame. And we always in planning work backwards. So using the July 1st deadline for the next cycle, we would work backwards from there. We know that some of these processes with first Planning Commission and then on to City Council can take months. Sign code is a good example. We spent about better part of 2 months in review with, once we had a good draft, it took about 2 months through Planning Commission and City Council. So some of these could very well be even lengthier discussions, so backing up even further. So I say, to be safe, it would happen in the first part of that second year, and then the docket would happen at the end of or the beginning of the first year, and then the middle part would be the analysis and allocating the resources. It's also entirely possible that if we get only a few comp plan amendment requests, and they're all very simple and straightforward, that we would adopt them much quicker. We want to be able to give the city the ability to, when we do have a really large, heavy lift to do, to give us the right amount of time to do that. So it's a really difficult question to answer, but I hear the concerns that you're expressing, that we want to provide certainty, and we deal with this even with subdivision applications. The first question an applicant asks is, well, how quick can I get this? How long is it going to take? And we say a lot of times, well, it depends on workload of staff, workload of the other departments. It depends on the quality of the application. It depends on how many iterations of the design we go through. It depends on so many forces that it's really difficult to give an answer to that. And so this is kind of in the same vein where, like I said, if it's a quick and easy, cut and dry, and everyone supports the amendments, then they could happen really quickly. But if they are very large in nature or very complicated in nature, it could take some time, and it should take time, because we do want to provide the right level of analysis to these. So hopefully I've answered that without providing a very clear and precise answer.
Actually, can I ask a quick follow-up, though, on that deadline issue? Is there any benefit to an applicant submitting early? Is there any review process that happens before July 2nd? Like, how do you prioritize? Are they time-stamped? How do you know who came first, and can you submit it early?
Sure. Yeah, that's also entirely possible, and we do keep track of when we get applications. We timestamp and we track them in our system. We record all of that information, definitely, and that is certainly something that could happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything will happen in terms of, we wouldn't start pushing the process with Planning Commission sooner, because we would still adhere to our deadline dates, July 1 in this case. On the flip side, the city could also say work on the comprehensive plan periodic update sooner than normal. So there's a couple ways you could approach it. I've seen other cities that adopt comp plan updates early, And the GMA actually does allow for that explicitly, that you can adopt an update early. So that's kind of in the same vein where you just have to meet the back end of it. So
I had wanted to quickly expand on the chair's idea, because what I heard was communicating with the public. We gather public input and then make decisions. And the example is, I still bump into people that don't know we have a farmer's market, that don't know that Kahani is part of the city. There's a lot of, communicating with the public is very important. Receive their input, but let them know in a clear and concise manner what's going on. And I just hope that the city council, when they get around to, getting out of the weeds on this and adopting it, one of the things that they'll charge staff with is, okay, now get this out to the public. I think the public wants and needs it. Okay.
Commissioner Crandall, you've hit on a very good point that I wanted to make, in that, in my experience, every community really struggles to understand the comprehensive plan just in general. It is a very, in some ways, esoteric document. It is a policy document. It is a document that does not necessarily directly affect everyday life. And I think that is something that plays into this, in that when there's a subdivision approved next door, that affects your daily life. You understand that, you get that, you get involved at that point. The comprehensive plan sets that framework, and it sets all the policy framework. It's our official stance on how we want to grow and how we will grow over a 20-year time frame. And it's really, I've found it to be really difficult, and I've run public meetings across the state in Eastern Washington, Western Washington, and everybody struggles with the comprehensive plan because of the nature of the comprehensive plan. It is in many ways almost too high level, but it because it's policy language, it doesn't always resonate with just a general property owner, or really sometimes even people who deal with it on a daily basis. It's a struggle to understand it. So you've identified a point that is good to acknowledge, that it is a complicated document on its face.
All right, I think I will read some of the comments from Commissioner Garrison, if that's okay. She identified the once-a-year statement that we already talked about, that the part that the GMA says do it once a year, or you can not do it any more than once a year. She wanted to say that it would make it clearer if you state who performs the review for each of these on the definitions. And I have to say I agree with that. And I know you guys have a copy of this, so I'm going to go over this quickly. And then in the definitions section, she also wanted to ask, did these go through the legislative process as well? And I think we already answered that question when we were talking about the zone reclassifications. In the biennial review section, she says that it seems that a waiting list after 2 years or 5 years, if the other exception kicks in, would be a huge burden to staff to handle. I'm not actually sure what she's talking about. Do you guys know what she's talking about?
We think that she's referring to just the amount of applications we get, and that again kind of goes back to the. But
we have to have that waiting list. There's no option. You will look at every single application. There's not sort of this running waiting list. It's just a list of applicants.
They come in at the July 1st deadline, and then whatever has been submitted prior to that, is part of the what gets reviewed for the docket.
Okay, there won't be any. We'll do this next year type thing. It's just.
So in the sense that if council decides to kick something out that is completely within the realm of what city council can do, and David did a good job of kind of highlighting that the city council can approve, reject, modify, and I would add even defer. They can say this is a good idea, but this is not the right time, and kick it out to when they feel is the right time. So there is a wide variety. They have broad authority provided by the Growth Management Act to make those decisions. So I think that's I think that answers.
I think you're right. That sounds about right. This last one is who initiates the rezone? It sounds passive and needs clarification. Since the rezone is not part of this process, I'm guessing we don't need to talk about this.
Well, the applicant would initiate the rezone. Again, that's a separate process that is required to actually implement the proposed zoning on the current land use map.
And actually, I'm thinking in the zone reclassification definition, maybe we could make it a little bit more clear and actually state that a zone reclassification is not part of this process. It is a separate process.
Sure.
Would that be helpful? I know that would be helpful for me because when I read all this, I thought the zone reclassification was part of it. And I don't know if there's anywhere where you might be able to also explain that future map versus current map situation a little bit better. Maybe even a definition for future map and current map. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But I think that is something that people have to understand first before they even start looking at this, right? Right. Okay, and I am just going to read this word for word. I'm not going to paraphrase it. So this is from Commissioner Garrison. Because she's absent tonight, I'm going to read this. Updating procedural documents is tedious. I have to commend staff for their ability to focus, reason, and deal with the details when doing this work. It's especially hard when the residents and developers and landowners are emotional and polarized about these issues. I have worked as a planner in the private sector only, and I might not fully understand what staff has to deal with, but from the outside looking in, this update appears to be another barrier in the development process. As developers lose their windows of opportunity and the predictability of the project becomes muddled, I worry Sammamish will lose the cooperation of the partners it needs to go beyond prescriptive codes and mundane development. I would like to see more negotiation and partnering to build quality, unique neighborhoods that instill pride and stability. I look at growth and change as necessary to maintaining a viable community. Our job is to figure out how to accommodate it in the most sensitive and non-disruptive ways possible. I'm not totally blind to the realities and problems staff face when confronted with plans for a new project. I feel a more definitive vision in plan form needs to be created to help staff make more creative decisions and work with developers. So that's what's from Jane, who can't be with us this evening. I think I would like to just close this part of our discussion with, I would like to see something a little bit more transparent for the community. Sort of date-wise. I know you guys don't want to be hamstringed, but I also feel like it's just a little bit too open, and I don't have a good solution for that. Maybe I'll have to think about it a little bit. But I feel like just saying you have to submit your applications July 1st, and then that's the last deadline, and there's no follow-up after that. I just feel like that leaves it too open-ended for me. And with that, if there aren't any more comments or questions, we can go ahead and open it up to the public. And remember, we do have the public hearing on this topic next time. And so that will be the time when we can look at what David and Doug present to us, the newest code, and then we can make amendments as we see fit. So, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to open up the public comment period. Oh.
Just one thing, and again, try to speed things along, but I happen to have a packet full of information here. And one of the things that I was looking at is comprehensive plan amendment, policy plan amendment, and it's some number about chapter 24. But they actually list on the front of this the cost. And so will this be part of or what we're talking about. I'm trying to find the right number. Land use application.
So I think you're referring to the application fee, is that correct?
Well, we were talking about how to communicate, and over here it says submittal items, and then it has a checklist with cost. I assume the costs change.
Sometimes, yes.
Okay.
But yeah, there would be an application form to implement this process, correct? And we'll tweak it based on what is eventually adopted as necessary.
Okay, so I'm going to open up the public comment period, and during this period, the public has the opportunity to comment on this item that we just talked about, this agenda item, and each person has up to 7 minutes to speak. So I will open the public comment period, and I have a list here of folks that want to speak, and at the end of that, if there are any others, then we can certainly hear from anyone who's here this evening. The first person on the list is Michael Cias. And if you'll please just state your name and address for the commission, that would be helpful.
My name is Michael Seals. I live at, 2880 244th Avenue Northeast. Does that help?
That's better.
Sorry about that. I'm used to yelling at people on the job. Okay. Okay, commissioners and staff. It's good to see you again. It was last fall, I think, and it's old business that never really got attended to the way it should. We got our permits in September last. And as far as this new process goes here, I just feel that there should be some way for wordage in this Title 24, or Section 24, whichever it is, to grandfather in those of us who have been in process for this last year at least, and that we can go ahead and try and get on the 217 docket because of that. We're not quite sure what's going to happen here.
I do want to address that because your docket will continue, right? There will be no changes to the folks that already submitted applications.
The docket that was set at the end of last year by City Council did not include any rezone request, any of the land use map change requests. There were just 2 text amendments that were.
Oh, okay.
But the review process did occur, and those are discrete events.
Say again?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand either.
So the docket that was set at the end of the year by City Council included 2 text amendments. 2 of the requests that were for text amendments. None of the land use map change requests were carried forward and put on the docket.
They were not addressed at all.
I see.
The City Council chose to set the docket and chose 2 of the comprehensive plan amendment applications.
So all of those ones that we reviewed, those are now removed from the docket?
Yeah, that process has concluded, and those are discrete events.
Okay, so anyone who was not included has to reapply?
Correct.
And so they would not be able to reapply till July 1st, 2019?
There is question about that in terms of
Okay.
what I think Chair Collins you're referring to in terms of the 3-year time frame. Is that correct?
Right. Well, that 3-year time frame I thought would be if City Council actually went through the review process.
Yeah, I think that's a question that we are looking into.
Okay.
It was,
I see.
yeah. And you can see several of us who own properties there were in our 70s. I've worked more than half my life to try and get this done. And at every step, we've been turned or crawled around or however they could keep from working. That's not just the city here, but the state and the county and on and on. And somehow there should be some wording in there that can allow us to be on this next docket, because otherwise we're all going to be in our late 70s before this starts, if we live that long. It's just not good use of the authority you have for your constituents. And last year, I know that you nearly unanimously approved us to the council, this project. So, not your fault, I suppose, if you want to call it that. But it's politics again.
Yeah.
People are really tired of politics. So, anyway, I also want to say that if we are not put on this docket and we don't get to do this project in a timely manner, the officials, elected and otherwise, are doing the city and the citizens, the taxpayers, a giant disservice, because this is a well-organized project, and the complete infrastructure will be paid for out of our pockets. And you're talking about a lot. Sewer pump stations, long-term runoff situations, on and on and on. So whatever can be done to get us on this docket is almost imperative for us. It's just, sooner or later, we're going to die. You know? So I don't know what else to say other than that right now. I know there's some things coming up here, but this is completely new to me, that we were all of a sudden wiped off the docket. That's just, we were left out. We weren't actually voted on. So it wasn't a yay or a nay. Good. We didn't get to go through the process. All we're asking is to let us go through this process, and it will determine that if it's a good project for the city, and I guarantee you it will be. As an architect and builder, I have been a good steward of all of these properties around there, and it's time to put in the infrastructure that will maintain it for the rest of the life of the city and the property there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and to be clear, we, as a planning commission, didn't review the specifics, merits of your project. That wasn't put upon us, but what we had to do was to be able to say, does this fit the criteria to move it into the docket process?
Right.
And so I just wanted to clarify that we weren't looking at the sewage and the nature of the project directly, just so that you were clear. As a commission, we're not supposed to look at that. That's more a land use decision that's in the hands of the council.
It's in the hands of the council, I understand that.
So even
Do you,
that next step would take that whole analysis part by the staff then, leading up to a decision by the council. So the question is, does that process start over again this year with a July deadline?
So I just want to be clear about what occurred last year. Is the gentleman was part of a proposal that was submitted on time, and the staff reviewed it as we did all the other projects. The staff brought it to the commission. The commission deliberated on it and recommended that it be placed on the docket to the city council. Then it was the city council's turn to review the proposal. We did the same thing with city council, and the city council ultimately declined to place the proposal on the docket for this year.
Okay.
They did vote.
it wasn't passed. I was there.
Well, it's just that it wasn't passed to be moved onto the second stage, is what we're talking about here.
The bottom line is.
It wasn't passed to go through the review that Commissioner Anderson is talking about. So she's right. As a commission, we really are only supposed to look at whether or not staff will have enough time to analyze it in the following year.
I understand that, and believe me, I've learned a lot about what your concerns are here tonight, and I think some of them are very good. It's not my phone. Must be time for me to quit.
There's 7 minutes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again for your comment. And the next person to speak this evening is, I'm sorry, is it Starcase? Stark. Shelby?
I'm not going to take the 7 minutes. Yeah, the whole process from a from a landowner standpoint.
I'm sorry, name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry. Name is Stark Shelby. Address is 2856 244th Avenue Northeast.
That's all you need to say. Perfect.
Okay. I'm just saying that from our perspective as, citizens of the city, this whole thing is so discouraging. I mean, I don't see how anything ever gets built in the city, quite frankly. We did everything we could possibly do to make sure that we got on the docket in a timely manner, and the 3-3 no vote was really tragic. And if I recall, the part of the thing was that the staff had plenty of time. There were 3 items on there. None of them went any further, so I don't know what the staff did the rest of the year. They maybe didn't have any reason to be employed. It went nowhere. And I understand what you're trying to accomplish here tonight, and but from our perspective, we feel totally cheated on this thing, and having to go through another application and another 2.5 years of this, it's extremely discouraging. We've been here almost every meeting since probably last September. So the one, I won't belabor that anymore. I did want to know what one thing was. One of these alludes to here is a type 3. Page 3 of 8, zone reclassification. Zone reclassifications are type 3 land use actions subject to a hearing and decision by the hearing examiner. Can you clarify that for me, please?
I think this is what we were talking about earlier, right? Can you ask the question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. Page 3, item number 9, zone reclassification, the last sentence. Zone reclassifications are type 3 land use actions, subject to a hearing and a decision by the hearing examiner.
So what that means, and I'm going to try to explain this, and if I explain it wrong, you guys chime in. If you went through the docket process, you were approved to get on the docket, and then once you're on the docket, the staff had reviewed the application, and they had approved the application, or I'm sorry, staff had reviewed the application based on merit, and then the council had approved that whole docket. Then your rezone would be changed on the future land map. But what they told us earlier is that that doesn't change your current land use map. So you would also have to go back through a separate process, which is called the zone reclassification process, and have that application, or have the current land use map changed through that process. And that requires the hearing examiner. That's not the city council. That's the quasi-judicial person who looks at these types of things outside the city council. Is that okay? Right. So I know that's very complicated.
So type 3, that what you just described is type 3?
What I just described would be the type 3 land use action, right? It would be like the third step in the process.
Okay. Is type 3 defined anywhere in any document?
I'm guessing it is. I'm guessing it's all over the code.
Head, yes, over there.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you tell me what it is now?
I'm sorry, you can't speak with staff. You have to go through the commission.
Oh.
Say that again.
Could you ask them to explain it?
What is it that you want to know?
Type 3.
Oh, you want to know the definition of a type 3?
Yes.
Okay. You guys want to do
that? Was my original question.
The process that Chair Collins outlined with regard to the getting to the point of the zone reclassification request is accurate. Once that happens, an application for the zone reclassification would need to be submitted. At that point, the type 3 refers to a hearing examiner process. So the staff would then review it, prepare a staff report, prepare a recommendation, possibly a SEPA review if necessitated. And then that would go in, it would be issued. There would be a notice of recommendation, a notice of public hearing. A public hearing would be scheduled. The hearing examiner would hold the public hearing at City Hall and at the dais, and the merits of the request would be presented. There would be the opportunity for public to comment on that request in terms of support or not supporting the request. And then based on the arguments presented at that hearing, the third-party hearing examiner will then 10 days later write a decision on that, and then the decision will be subject to an appeal, 21-day appeal, and then if the appeal period closes without any appeals, then the decision stands, and then the zone would then be reclassified. So that's what happens after the comp plan amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, the next person on the list is Pamela Stewart. I think she may have left. Is she out in the hall? No? Okay. The next person is Jolie Imperatoli. Hope I said that right.
My name is Jolie Imperatori. I live at 745 2nd Avenue Northwest in Issaquah. I was a resident of the Sammamish Plateau for 45 years. I was on every planning commission, comprehensive plan, and plan for the county since 1974, except for the last one. At that time, I did not live in the city. I sort of can't believe what I'm hearing tonight. Where were you? You approved us being on the docket 100%, unanimously, but in November. And now it sounds like you don't remember any of that. You're all the same people except one, right? Weren't you all here?
Three of us, I think, were here.
Everybody's a new member? I recognize some of you. But we came here, the staff recommended that we be on the docket. You approved us unanimously, twice, first at the sort of second meeting, then at the public hearing, or when you actually voted. And I wonder if this new docket ordinance isn't designed to make sure nobody ever does anything in the Sammamish again. I mean, that's how rigid it is. Is this all to just get on the docket? Or is this to do a rezone? Have you ever done a rezone, any of you? No. It's a very arduous, hard job. And it costs lots of money, and you get beaten to death by not only the staff, but you and the city council to make sure that it's a good thing for the city. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but it takes sometimes 2 years to get through. Because I've done a lot of rezones, not one in Sammamish lately. I also talked to probably 10 other jurisdictions, 3 of which, if you have similar type zoning, like from R1 to R4, you don't have to be on the docket. They'll put you straight through to a rezone application because they're close enough zonings, or some of them do them by medium, low, high density. So if you were to go from R1 to R12, then you'd have to go through the docket process. But they don't make you do this. This is a big, expensive step. And also, it's not fair to the people who live in your city. These people have been here for 18, 20 years. They were sold the property, and the zoning was R4. It's been changed 3 times, twice by the county and once by you, and never were they given notice, which is a legal problem. Then you annexed them in and didn't give them notice. I've been through every paper of the annexation. You didn't give them notice. So you've got some families out here, 5 families, that have been waiting around forever. It's sort of like, then you wait 2 years. It's sort of like, you have so stock, and I want to cash it in, but we're not going to trade for 2 years. The amount of financial and burden you put on people, and when I'm using you as the staff, the council, because what happened at the council is you unanimously approved us to be on the docket. We went to the city council, and they got into some kind of a poof, and it turned out to be a 3-3 vote because one of the councilmen weren't here. So as a result, it's turned down, but it wasn't turned down. No, it was in limbo. So we came back for reconsideration, but the city council meeting went on till 12 o'clock at night, and by the time we get to reconsideration, nobody wants to talk to us, which I don't blame them. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I'm angry. So, and they were too. They'd been here much too long. And you have a rule that you're supposed to end the city council meetings at a certain time. I can tell you, I went to 72 meetings in Issaquah, and some of them went to 2 o'clock in the morning. You leave those meetings just filled with hate and disrespect for the people that are batting this around for 9 hours and then don't come up with a decision. And then once we get on the docket, which is really sort of, I felt, a formality, now you're making it almost like a rezone, then you get to do a rezone. Again, some of you need to go and work with the staff a couple of times while they put somebody through the ringer to get a rezone. I mean, and as they say, it's very expensive. The fees are almost $10,000. And the engineering, the road, you know, you have to cover sewer, water, everything. And every one of those studies costs lots of money. So by the time it gets back to you on a rezone, you definitely have ferreted out everything that could be possibly right or wrong about this property. And all we're asking to do is to be allowed to do a rezone and apply. And as they say, we got there one time, except the city council, and it's not your fault. It was a disaster. I mean, they behaved very, very badly, and you know, there was a lot of frayed tempers more on the council because they were there so late, and they just didn't want to hear another thing, another agenda item. And they said no. So we weren't turned down, we weren't heard. And as I say, these people are the people that live in your city. They're supposed to be your friends and neighbors. And as I say, this property has been rezoned and annexed between all those 4 times and no notice on any of them, which is against the law. By law, you must give notice to everybody that's in 300 feet or 1,000 feet, depending what the law was at the time. And it was the city and the county's obligation to do that. They didn't know they got zoned from R4 to R1. Nobody told them. And I don't think you'd be any happier if it happened to you, would you? No. And so then I guess what I noticed is this comp plan amended procedure, which is, oh, just let me say one more thing, is, I'll use somebody else's time. It seems to be that people who are elected and unelected officials make a lot of these rules and regulations without having any idea of the impact that you're putting on the people you're making them. As I said, each and every one of you should be forced to do a rezone. Take a piece of property and try to take it through. And I said, we'll waive the fees for you. But go through what you have to do for studies, for everything like that. It's not that it's going to come to this commission like a big mystery.
Ms. Imperatori, please wrap it up.
Here.
Thank you.
So I guess I take really exception to what you're doing to the people who live in your city, who have lived here, some of them since 1980.
Thank you very much for your comment. The next person on the list is Sunita Shastri. I think she may have left also. Okay, and that wraps it up. Is there anyone else? Ms. Wichter and Paul. You can be after Mary.
Hello, my name is Mary Wichter. I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. First of all, I wanted to thank you for the review you guys had of the document, especially the new people, because when you read a city document, the first thing you find out as you're reading, you don't know any of the terms. It's really tough to figure out. I've been attending meetings for about 2 years, so I loved all the comments and input that you guys had, and I thank you very much for the amount of time it takes to read that and write it. Secondly, I did put a very tiny item on the comprehensive plan docket last year. There are some mistakes in the map where things have been left out. And you can't get them changed unless you can get on the docket. So there were 2 things that did get through. I believe one was the transportation plan, and the other one was another city thing. I'm going to guess it was like the pro plan. And those were the only 2 that were carried forward. Mine, which actually could have actually been merged in with the ones with the city, didn't even get in. So it is very hard to get in. But I learned a lot in the process. I learned that the city incorporated in 1999. The first comprehensive plan was done in 2003. That document is no longer available online. The city doesn't want to have an archived one, which I believe they should. I think since there's only 2, we should have the prior ones so you can see the differences. And then 8 years later would be 2011, but there isn't one from 2011. The next comp plan, I believe, was worked on in 2012 to 2015, so it actually took 3 years to get the second comp plan. So you've got a 2003, which we don't have that copy anymore, the 2015, which is online, but it has some mistakes. And there's even simple things in it, like if you're just reading it, I believe there's a bikeway trails pathways plan, which has been renamed to non-motorized. So unless you've been following all these meetings for the last 2 years, you're kind of confused when you read the comp plan. And for those people that are confused about comp plans, I see the comp plan as this guiding light. It's the thing by which you do, so people do need to be able to read it. So there are some very simple things. So the problem is if you aren't updating your comp plan, it gets out of date. King County makes changes or the state makes changes, and if you're not integrating some changes, you really have a problem. So I have a suggestion for you. I went through thousands of pages of code for stormwater last year as your stormwater trooper and persistent citizen. I believe King County does an errata sheet. That's where they have the document, and then they have a little errata that comes out. So when you catch mistakes or missing things, I don't have to come to 15 city council meetings or attend for 5 years to get 2 words changed. Please, let's do that. It's not that hard. And if you don't want to call it an errata sheet, call it a hint sheet. This is what we used to call it. This is what we call it now. This was the time or the date it changed. You absolutely have to track those. There's no way that you can take no changes. And so listening what I heard tonight, you guys had some great feedback, and I love your idea about the flow chart. I'm a computer programmer. I get flow charts. We have the biennial budget, and we're doing the 2018 and all this stuff, and they have to reapply. If the last comp plan was 2015, you got kicked out in 2016 to 2017 or 2018, and that can be a 2-year process. That means it might be 2020, and then it might be 2021. Well, the comp plan was from 2015, so you're already 6 years into the 8-year. And then if they're going to do new things, then you can't even get in. So basically, you're making it so you can never have a comp plan update. So I'm a computer programmer, coder, core design, kernel operating system. We maintain old code, we do new parallel development, we do new features, we have new rollouts. There are ways to do that. I think you have to find a way that you can take people's input, allow changes to be made, or at least have errata sheets, and then let people know when it's coming, because right now it really seems like you couldn't. And I was at those meetings last year. They did go late. There was a lot of frustration in the hallway, in the bathroom, and it just seems absolutely incredible that you can't get really small changes in. And I'm a person that's been attending 2 years. I try to research. Every time I speak, I did not research tonight because I wanted to listen. I've stood up here, I felt neglected, like my comments aren't done. I hear people hear me speak and they think that they're good ideas. It's just really hard to get anything through. So the one thing I'll leave you with, doesn't matter what I say or any of these other people say, if one of you doesn't latch on to something that we say, it doesn't get to city council and it never goes on. So what you guys write down, take notes, or show us interest, that does get carried forward. So that's why you see me a lot at these meetings. I try to hit it before it gets to city council. And like with the sign code, I stood up and said the same thing over and over and emailed it in and everything. And I think maybe we're going to look at art and the e-sign program in the fall, maybe, instead of be booting out 1 or 2 years. So, but please, what you latch onto and what you write is absolutely essential for making progress for any of our citizens. So I'm sorry I didn't prepare more tonight. I just wanted to listen. I think there are some simple things you can do, and here's the biggest one. If you're going to do a rezone, it sounds like you have to do the future use map and the regular map, where Doug explained that the future use map really should be, this is a commercial area, this is a residential area. It shouldn't have R1 and R4, which Jolie said are very similar. So why don't you change the comp plan map so it's more generalized, so you don't have to go through 2 sets? And I will tell you, I tried to get a simple map change in. I can't. Even for landslides and erosion hazards, which should be in there. And you also don't want them to conflict with King County, who's also changing their map. So you've got to be able to change some small things every year, or have an errata sheet or a hint so people can do. You've got to be able to allow something to happen. And right now it sounds like it'll be 6 or 8 years before you allow anything, which really puts people doing any sort of rezoning. They literally, their hands are tied. So thank you for your time and all the work that you do. It is absolutely essential what you say, what you recommend to City Council, how it gets put, the staff that support things, the better product that you have that's more user-friendly and usable. You are writing code not for the city or yourselves, you're writing it for the users, and Jolie made a great point. If you haven't done the user testing, you're going to get hung up, and everybody's seen my photo things. My photo things are user testing of the code. It's like, I didn't talk to people, I just took signs of what's out there. How does this work with your code? And I think that's really missing in the city. It's not a people problem, it's a process problem. So somehow that needs to get in. And anytime you do a piece of code, you need to think about how it impacts shorelines, environmentally critical areas, and neighborhood character, and town center. And you've got to think about all those pieces every time you do a piece of code. And then that's what makes good, robust planning. And if you get that user input early, you end up with successful, good working code. So I challenge you to do that, and I thank you for all the work that you do. Thanks.
Chair Collins, I would channel my inner Larry Crandall, Commissioner Crandall, and ask that you amend the agenda to extend the adjournment time.
It is now 8:30, so let's amend the agenda to go until, let's try 8:40, because I don't think there's anyone besides Paul that's ready to speak. So all those in favor of amending the agenda to extend our meeting tonight until 8:40, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say no. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Stickney.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Paul Stickney. I'm at 504 228th Ave Southeast, and welcome to the newest commissioner and relatively new commissioner, O'Farrell. And for those of you who do not know me much, I do stutter, but I try to get through it now and then. And I think I have a few things that will be interesting for you this evening. First off, in regards to Mary Wichter comment, the first comp plan was adopted in 2003, but then it had major updates during 2005 and 6. And then the periodic update began in June of 2013, and the comp plan actually got adopted in October of 15, which is our second comp plan, because the first comp plan was repealed and replaced with the second one. And Mary, if you or anybody else on the commission would like a copy of all the documents that were online, I had them all downloaded, categorized, and indexed before the city took those documents offline for reasons of their own, which I don't understand, but they were taken off roughly February of 2016. So the whole 2013 to 15 comp plan process, which has a lot of background information, is not on the website, but I have a copy of all of it in case someone's interested. I give it to you on a USB drive. Okay, here comes the comments from this evening. I think it would really inform everyone to know how many docket requests items have there been per year since 2006. So we have a rough look at what's the problem. So that, past behavior is, predictor of future, and I think that would be helpful. Second, I think it would be real interesting to know of the 39 cities in King County, and maybe those in Pierce and Sammamish, maybe, to know how many of them have once a year review periods and how many are on 2-year cycles. Because I'm not aware of too many cities that are on 2. But I think that would just be useful information. Then I have a question. In reading through all of this, here's what I can't seem to figure out off the bat. I think it's saying the city, if this code gets adopted, the city would be on a biannual basis. The city could not do annual, is that correct? Or can the city do annual, but the general public would have to do bi? That's what I was trying to figure out in this. And second, the city, I think I do have it figured out correctly, though, that citizens couldn't make substantive changes to the comp plan, but the city could. So I think a clarification on those two matrix would be good, because when we, and that's the Queens we, I've attended all city council meeting and PC meetings since mid 2013, so I take on the sort of king's we when it comes to the city or the Queens, is if we would have been on a bi-cycle and wanted to annex Klahani, we could not have. So I'm just saying that I think that's an important thing to study. Something else that is interesting, and I'd like to state this because I don't want it to have an edge. This is not stated in a spirit of who's right. It's stated in a spirit of what's right. Our future land use map is identical to our current land use map. I took a lot of issue with that in the process. Talked with the consultants a lot about it. And the general discussion was that the city chose to not want changes in land use during this comp plan, so that might affect the process until the point that the future land use map is not identical to the current land use map. And if I'm wrong, I'll stand corrected, but the consultants and Emily Artesh told me many times that the two maps are identical. So that's just a piece of information to weigh in your overall situation here. Then I do support what many of you have mentioned tonight. It would be wonderful to have this mapped out and charted on an 8-year periodic cycle of when and what can happen at what stages. Because if I heard this correctly, if it goes to a cycle every 2 years, the first year would be a less comprehensive. It would be comprehensive, but it would be somewhat comprehensive and making the choice, do we recommend this go to the council or not, to consider putting it on the docket. And then if the council said yes, then in year 2 it would go through a more comprehensive approach to see if the council agreed to the change or not, and then you'd do the Chapter 3 or the Title 3 or the Level 3 land use map. So I think I understand that 2-year cycle. What I'm curious about, however, is on page 4, item B1E, there's a 3-year period for the city, and on page 6, item 4A, there's a 4-year period for the public, and you guys have already discussed this. Now, I've been relatively precise on many things I've said tonight. This is not one. This is just a feeling, and I haven't studied it so deep, so this is anecdotal and a more question statement. But it would be very interesting to further refine what was stated by many commissioners tonight, that if the council reviewed something or made a decision on something, how does that time frame affect these 2-year cycles? Because if you read this code a certain way, you could say that the 8-year periodic update, and I'm almost done, I'll get it wrapped up here, 8-year periodic update would keep you from reviewing something for either 3 or 4 years, which is halfway through the next cycle. So there is, to me, a lot of things here that are a bit shades of gray, need to be cleared up. But first and foremost, I would close is, what really is the nature of the problem? And it would be a wonderful thing, I think, to look back at how many docket requests have there been, and is there really an issue or not?
Thank you, Paul. Is that something that staff could prepare? Because I'm also interested in that as well. Kind of back to, say, I don't know, maybe we could do the last 5 years. How many applicants per year have there been?
Yeah, we could put that together.
There hasn't.
He's been at the city 3 years. There's never been, because when they were working on the comp plan, they don't do a docket. It needs to go back. So the very first docket was, so it really needs to go way back.
Maybe we can talk about this offline. But it would be helpful to see something about how many applications have been put through each year for however many years. Okay. So I think that ends the public comment period, and we are ready to adjourn unless anyone has anything else to say.
I move the meeting be adjourned.
Seconded.
All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say no. And the meeting is adjourned at 8:41.